So lesson we're going to be covering let and const and also a little bit about var and how you can use let and when you should use let and const. So we are able to use const with arrays, make updates to the arrays, and then within the scope we're able to declare variables and use those variables within the scope that they're declared or within the child scope. So any of the parent scopes that have variables being declared, they're also accessible within the child scope, but not the other way around, where if we want to access the value of A outside of this block scope where it's being declared within the function, we're going to throw an error within the console. That's all coming up in this lesson. Always declare variables using let or const rather than var. So let's create some examples. So in order to create a variable, we give the variable a name, and then we can declare the variable by using let. So let will allow us to change the value of the variable, and const will not allow us to change the value. So in this case, we're going to create a string with the name of my name, and it's going to have a string value of my name. And then we can also output the value into the console. So let's go ahead and gonna output that into the console and save the code. So there's our content being output into the console from the variable. So let's go ahead and we're going to try to make an update to the my name. So let's say, for instance, the last name will change. So we write the last name, and we're going to be updating the variable value. So now when it hits the statement for the console log, it's going to be outputting that new value. Let's update this to const and see what happens. So we make it const, we see that we're assigning and we're getting an assignment to const variable error, and that's because we're trying to reassign a value to the variable. So you're able to do it with let, and you're not able to do it with const. Previously, before the newest versions of JavaScript, we had var available to us, and var worked where you could also redeclare the variable, reassign a value to it. So there was no restrictions to what you can do with var. And var is the oldest way to declare variables. And if the variable is declared within the scope of the function, that value is only within the function and only within the scope of that function. So we're not able to access the value of A outside of the function. So even though we invoke the function, and then if we do a console log to get the value of A, we're going to see that we're throwing an error that A is not being referenced because it's within the function. And this is what's known as the scope, the function scope. And meanwhile, these variables are available within the outside scope. So let's create another variable, and then we'll update these to let and const. So this one will be global scope. So this is a global scope value, and that means that it's being declared globally, which allows us to access that value anywhere, even within the function itself. So we can always reference the value of B within the function when it gets invoked, and that's where we're able to access the value of B. Let and const were introduced in ES6 and are block scoped, meaning the variable declared with let and const is only accessible within the block that it's being declared. So let's go ahead and we're going to create these and update these to let and see what happens. So right now we're still able to access the value, and that's once again because this function is sitting within the global scope, and that variable was declared within the global scope. So that's where we're able to access it. And just as we just saw, we can also declare the variable with let, or we should be declaring it with let. And then now this variable for A is only available within this function scope. It's not available outside. The difference between let and const is that let allows you to reassign the value to a different value. So we saw that over here, that if we do want to reassign the value, then we should be using let. Otherwise, we're not going to be able to reassign the value. So const does not allow us to reassign the value. And once the variable is declared with const, we're not able to change it. If we are using arrays, because arrays are immutable in JavaScript, so we're going to go ahead and we're going to create an array. Let's give it a value of C, and the contents of the array will be 1, 2, 3. And so this array, right now, we'll just have the 3 items in there that we can log out, and there's the values of the array 1, 2, 3. And unlike the variables, because the arrays are mutable and objects are mutable, we can add to that array. So if we want to add another value and save it, That's going to add another value into the array with an index value of 3 so that we get it within the row. So there's our values, and there's our new values that are being assigned to the array. We can also update and change the values of the items in the array by their index value. So let's update this and we'll change it into a string. And there we see that we've got those values have been changed. And even though we're using const, we're still able to make changes to the contents of the array. It's recommended that you use const by default and only use let when you need to reassign the variable. So what this does is this helps you ensure that your code is more readable, predictable, and secure.